Welcome in, I'm Artris, and in this video we're going to be going over your pre-release guide for OP-08 2 Legends. Now normally when I do these guides, I usually go through every card and give it a rating of F through S. However, I think to save everyone some time and to make it a little bit more digestible, we'll go over just the cards that you should keep an eye out for when drafting. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how a pre-release works, you are usually given 6 packs to draft a 40-card deck from, and then from there, usually you'll get to choose your leader to play with, but in some cases, your local game store will have a predetermined leader, such as a Rainbow Luffy. It's very likely that you'll see the same leaders repeated over and over because in this limited environment, I think that a lot of people have figured that there's only a set amount of leaders that are very viable. In red, we have OP-01 Zoro, which when you attach a Dawn to it, all of your characters get buffed by 1000 power. We have Starter Deck 1 Luffy, which can attach a rested Dawn to a leader or character, so adding some extra power, basically getting the max value out of your Dawn. Then we also have OP-07 Dragon, which similarly to Luffy, you can actually attach Dawn from a character to another character or your leader to another character. In green, we have Bonnie, which came from OP-07, which is a very defensive leader. It might not be as viable in OP-08 draft as it was in OP-07 draft because there isn't as much support for it, but it is still worth mentioning. Of course, we have Starter Deck 2 Kid, which I think a lot of people very commonly play, basically allowing you to attack twice with your leader by only paying 3 Dawn and pitching a card. In blue, we have Starter Deck 3 Croc, which minus 4 Dawn to be able to bounce a character that is 5 or less. In yellow, we have Katakuri from OP-03. When you attach 1 Dawn, you can either look at your life or your opponent's life, and then you gain an extra 1000 power. So very nice there to get that power boost. And then we have OP-06 Yamato, which is yellow and green, and this has double attack, and then once your opponent's life is 3 or less, you can then attach 2 rested Dawn to a character. So I would advise probably not using that one as much because I think that there's going to be a fair amount of people using 5 life leaders, so Yamato is better in a 4 life leader environment. However, it is worth mentioning. And then of course, I mentioned the Rainbow Luffy at the beginning, which this will allow you to basically play any archetype, so you don't have to worry about something being leader locked. So this will allow you to play things that you might not normally be able to play. A couple of new leaders that might be worth mentioning to at least try out in a draft environment could be the red and blue Marco, which says Dawn ×1, activate main once per turn, draw 1 card and place 1 card from your hand at the top or bottom of your deck, then give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 2000 power for this turn. That is a very strong effect. The only downside to this leader is the 4 life, but being able to cycle around through your deck and then also having a built-in power reducer in your leader is very nice and makes trading a lot easier. And then the other leader that I think is worth mentioning is Carrot in green, and it says activate main once per turn. If you have a Minx type character, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. And I think it's pretty easy to find some Mink characters in this set, so all you need is 1 on the field, and then you're able to activate that ability for free. And resting a 5 cost is pretty powerful overall. So now that we talked a little bit about the leaders and how pre-release works, we're going to go through some of the cards that you should be looking out for. But before we get into the in-depth review of the set, please make sure to drop a like and a sub for the channel. It helps out immensely. If you find anything in this video useful, please consider that. Thank you so much for all the support. So onto the cards. I think what is very important here is to talk about the method in which you should be evaluating cards that you should be putting into your deck. And a very simple acronym which should help you remember the priority of these cards is GRAPE. And GRAPE stands for this. The G stands for your game winners. These are cards that will, once they're on the field, help you close out games and are very hard for your opponent to answer. The R stands for removal, so any kind of cards that can either answer an opponent's card or help you trade into bodies or remove a threat are high priority in my opinion. The A stands for advantage, and what that means is any kind of card advantage that you can get is very, very valuable, and that would either be drawing or being able to stack your deck or cycle. Any of those effects are very useful in a limited set. This is mostly because the more cards you see, the better options you have to play per turn. The P stands for protection, so this can be anything from blockers to 2K counters or even counter events, so those are pretty important depending on what they are. And then finally, we have E for everything else. These are usually your vanilla cards or cards that aren't quite good enough to be the game-winning bombs, but can pose a little bit of a threat in the mid-game. So starting off with the G, the game winners, we're going to start right into a card that is typically not a card type that I include in this. However, Electrical Luna in green is very much a bomb in my opinion. It's a 3-cost event that says main, all of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 7 or less will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase, and the trigger says rest up to one of your opponent's characters. That effect is extremely powerful, especially when your opponent has swung all out and they could be pushing for lethal next turn. Instead, you play this for 3 and you turn off all of those characters, and now the only thing that your opponent has to rely on is their leader plus possibly a rush character coming in. So that will help establish a little bit more defense for you and can help you either make a little bit of a comeback or just push ahead at that point. Next up, we have Edward Newgate, which is a 10-cost, 12,000 power body. And it says on play, if your leader's type includes Whitebeard Pirates and you have 2 or less life cards, select all of your opponent's characters on their field. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, none of the selected characters can attack unless your opponent trashes 2 cards from their hand whenever they attack. Now, this card is only going to be a really strong bomb if your leader is either Marco or if you're playing with Rainbow Luffy in your limited set. However, if you do want to just draft this and have a really big body on the field, you could do so. I will say though, once you get to 10 Dawn, you might want to be using your Dawn differently, establishing either multiple bodies or using that Dawn to swing into things to attach to other characters. However, this is not an awful option if you don't really have a lot of top end. I will say though, this is mostly going to be used if you are playing Rainbow Luffy. Another card that I wouldn't really consider a bomb, but to be fair, there's not a lot of bombs in this set, is the 7-cost King in purple, and it says on play Dawn -1. If your opponent has 5 or more Dawn cards on their field, this character gains rush during this turn. So this card, being a surprise rush unit, is pretty strong overall, and it can be a great finisher. It's a strong body. The only downside is it doesn't have counter. And once again, this is not necessarily a super strong threat. I would still consider this a bomb just because of the power level of this set. Doesn't necessarily seem to be as strong as previous sets. To go along with that theme, I'm going to include Charlotte Smoothie, which is a 7-cost 9,000 power body. Because we don't have a lot of big bodies in this set, this will likely go unanswered. Even though it's a vanilla, it is one of these cards that your opponent's going to have trouble answering it overall. And that's why I say Electrical Luna is actually a really good card, because if this card swings, your opponent can tap it down with Electrical Luna. However, other than that, it's a little bit more difficult to try to answer this card or remove it from the field. Another really strong card on the upper tier of the G list, I would say, is Charlotte Linlin, a 9-cost 9,000 power body. And on play, Dawn -1, you may trash 1 card from your hand. Normally that's a bad thing. However, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. Then add up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less to the top or bottom of your opponent's life cards face up. So this will heal you and then also act as a bit of removal. Sure, you're trashing a card, but that doesn't really matter. You can view that as the card you're trashing is instead now going to your life, and you're going to get a card back instead. You are also healing your opponent. However, you're removing a threat from the field and establishing a body of your own. So for all of those reasons, this is a very strong card. In black, we have Kaido, which is a 9-cost 9,000 power body. Activate main once per turn. You may trash 1 card from your hand. If this character was played on this turn, trash up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 7 or less. Then your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand. So once again, you are subtracting a card from your hand. However, your opponent is as well, and they are also losing a body. It can answer that big vanilla threat that I was just talking about with Charlotte Smoothie. And this also is a very powerful attacker after it has been established. I know the wording on this is a little awkward, activate main once per turn, but I think it's just trying to work around future sets like potentially a Blackbeard leader. Along the same lines as Charlotte Smoothie, we have Basil Hawkins, which is a vanilla 7-cost 9,000 power body. Once again, very hard to remove, very hard to answer for your opponent, and it will start doing damage. It will require at least 3 cards from your opponent every turn if you're going to hit face. If you're hitting bodies, that might be different. However, it's really hard for your opponent to counter out of that as well if it's hitting a body. So once again, these are super strong. You want to get them. And even better, these are commons, so you're probably going to be able to find these more frequently than some of the other bombs that we've talked about. And then in the secret rare spot, we have 8 cost Silver's Rayleigh. This is an 8 cost, 8,000 power body. On play, select up to 2 of your opponent's characters and give one character minus 3,000 power and the other minus 2,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. Then KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 3,000 power or less. So this acts as removal. It's got a big body on it. You can trade into some of the bodies that you've minused. If you can't trade into them, those minusing effects last until the start of your next turn. So they also will be shrunk and they can't swing into you as easily. So it also acts as like a defensive unit. And then to wrap up all of the game winners, we have Kaido and Linlin, a 10 cost, 12,000 power body. When attacking, Don minus 10. KO all characters other than this character, then add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards and trash up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards. This will likely be a game finisher. However, it will help you stabilize if you do need it by being able to heal and then getting rid of the entire board. So it has a couple of effects that are really powerful. If this hits the board, it's not going to be answered. I don't think there's anything in this set removal-wise that can answer it. So you just kind of have to either rush down your opponent or just pray for the best. On to removal, we have Portgus D-Ace, which is an on-play, give up to 2 of your opponent's characters minus 3,000 power during this turn. Then if your leader's type includes Whitebeard Pirates, this character gains Rush during this turn. This is a card from OP-02 that is being reprinted for this set. If you're playing Rainbow Luffy, this is an amazing card because you can get the Rush. You'll also get this if you're playing Whitebeard or Marco. However, if you're not playing any of those leaders, this also just has an on-play of give 2 characters minus 3,000 power during the turn. So Red's removal, in a sense, is power reduction and then trading into those bodies. So I consider this a bit of a pseudo removal piece. A little bit more of an unconventional removal piece is Kuro Morimo and Chess. Both of these go in play in tandem, and the Chess says on play, give it to one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn. Then if you don't have Kuro Morimo, play up to 1 from your hand. And then Kuro Morimo says on play, if you have a Chess, KO to one of your opponent's characters with 3,000 power or less. So with the combination of these two, you can KO a 5,000 power body and then establish 2 bodies of your own. It's a little bit harder to set up, but it is a removal piece at the end of the day. Next, we have Lapins, which is a Dawn ×2 when attacking. If your leader has the Drum Kingdom type, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 4,000 power or less. Once again, really good with Rainbow Luffy. Probably not as good in any other deck. I don't think you're really going to want to play the new Chopper leader, but if you do, this could be a good addition for it. Next, we have Wapple, which is a Dawn ×1 when attacking. Give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn. Then this character gains plus 2,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. So once again, a power reduction, but it also boosts itself, which is very nice. And then you can probably trade into something pretty easily. So I would highly value this card. It also has a 1k counter on it. So at the end of the day, that's really important as well, instead of having a brick. So yeah, Wapple is really good in this limited set. In green, we have Inu Arashi, which is a 5 cost 6,000 power body. On play, if your leader has the Minx type, up to 2 of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 5 or less will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase. This will be great if you're running Carrot, also really good if you're running Rainbow Luffy. And the same thing goes for Carrot, which is a 5 cost 6,000 power body. On play and when attacking, up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 7 or less will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase. This is a very spicy effect that will keep a lot of bodies tapped down. Both on play and when attacking is unheard of with this effect. So Carrot is probably one of the stronger cards to come from the set overall. Great addition to green if you're looking to play Bonnie. Then we have Consulate, which is a when attacking, up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 4 or less will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase. So you don't even have to attach Dawn to this. You could just swing with it and keep a 4 cost tapped down. Of course, we talked about Electrical Luna, so we don't really need to go over this again. Into blue, we have Edward Weevil, which is a Dawn ×1 when attacking. Return up to 1 character with a cost of 3 or less to the owner's hand. 3 is a awkward spot. However, it will bounce things back to the opponent's hand. Maybe there's a blocker that costs 3 or less and you want to get rid of it. That is a good way to do it. Blue usually bounces or bottom decks. Next, we have Jozu, a 6 cost 7,000 power body. On play, you may return one of your characters other than this character to the owner's hand. Return up to 1 character with a cost of 6 or less to the owner's hand. Now, normally you don't want to be bouncing things back to your own hand. However, it would make sense to just drop something like a 1 cost or maybe a 2k, and then you can just get it back to your hand and get the bounce effect off of Jozu. Next, we have Phoenix Brand, a 4 cost event. says main, you may reveal 2 cards with a type including Whitebeard Pirates from your hand. Place up to 1 character with a cost of 6 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. This one's a little bit harder to hit, but I thought it would be worth including just in case you are able to draft a few Whitebeard Pirates. This could be a relevant card in some matchups. Into purple, we have Charlotte Oven, which is a when attacking Dawn -1. KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. We talked about the Charlotte Lin, the 9-cost 9,000 power body. Its removal puts things into life. And then we have Conquest of the Sea, a 6-cost event that says Dawn -2. If your leader has the Animal Kingdom Pirates or Big Mom Pirates type, KO up to 2 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less. So there's a few different leaders that you could play that this could hit. The more obvious one is Rainbow Luffy. However, if you're playing Katakuri, this could be an event worth putting into your deck. In black, we mentioned Kaido. This will trash a 7-cost or less. Next up, we have Jack, a 7-cost 8,000 power body. This character gains +4 cost, and the activate main, you may rest this character, draw 1 card, and trash 1 card from your hand, then KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. So a little bit of card draw and also removal built into the body. Hard to swing into, hard to remove because it is an 11-cost. A couple of things like Electrical Luna won't tap this down at the end of the day. Finally, in black, we have Jinbei, a 5-cost 6,000 power body. Dawn ×1 when attacking. If you have a character with a cost of 8 or more, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So you need to have an 8-cost body on the field for this to happen. However, there are a fair amount of them that you can end up drafting. And then if you do have that, you're able to KO a 4-cost. So a pretty strong effect overall. Into yellow, we have Charlotte Opera, which is an on-play. You may trash 1 card from your hand, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of equal to or less than the number of your life cards. This will more than likely just hit a 4-cost because you're probably going to take a life. Next, we have Nami. It's an on-play. You may trash 1 card with a trigger from your hand, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. Then if you have 3 or less cards in hand, draw 1 card. And the trigger says activate this card's on-play effect. The only downside of this card is you do have to have a trigger to toss out with it, but there are some triggers that you could throw into the deck just to meet this stipulation. Next up, we have S-Snake. This is an on-play. Up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less, other than Monkey D. Luffy, cannot attack until the end of your opponent's next turn, and then the trigger says activate this card's on-play effect. So preventing an attack is a pseudo-removal effect, and I think it's worth adding into your deck because there aren't too many Luffys in this set. And then to wrap it up in yellow, we have Burn Blade, a 5-cost event that says you may trash 1 card from the top of your life cards, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 7 or less, and then the trigger says you may add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand, add up to 1 card from your hand to the top of your life cards. So the main effect, being able to just trash a card and then KO a 7-cost, is pretty powerful. You'll obviously have to see how the situation's been played out in the game state for you to be able to trash this if you want to or not. However, being able to get rid of a 7-cost for only 5 is pretty powerful. And then finally, we mentioned Silver's Rayleigh, the power reduction, and then also the ability to KO something 3,000 power or less. And then Kaido and Lin, which just blows up the entire board. So that is probably the epitome of all removal, though. Now on to the A for card advantage. There's not a lot of card draw or cycling in this set, unfortunately. But we do have a few. The first starts in blue with Thatch, which says if this character would be removed from the field by your opponent's effect or KO'd, trash this character and draw 1 card instead. So nice little card draw onto the body. We have Namule, which is a blocker, and on play, draw 2 cards and place 2 cards from your hand at the top or bottom of your deck in any order. So being able to stack your life or cycle is extremely powerful in limited. We talked about Jack in the removal section, but this also allows you to draw a card and trash a card. So once again, cycling, very powerful. And then one of the stronger card draw engines that we have in this set is Jewelry Bonnie in yellow, which is a 3-cost 4,000 power body. Dawn ×1 your turn. Once per turn, when a card is removed from your opponent's life cards, draw 2 cards and trash 1 card from your hand. And the trigger is draw 2 cards and trash 1 card from your hand. So if you're able to repeatedly attack your opponent's life and connect, you're able to then establish more of an advantage in your hand size because you're able to at least go positive in the cards that you're drawing every turn with this. And then finally, we have Queen, which is a reprint from Starter Deck 4. It's a blocker and on-play Dawn -1. Draw 2 cards and trash 1 card from your hand. One of the best blockers to come out of the game, and it's funny because it came from one of the starter decks to get you into the game. Then onto the P for protection. These will include blockers, counter events, and 2K counters. We'll start off with 20 Doctors, which is a 2-cost blocker. This has a 1k counter on it, and it also just acts as a nice little blocker out on the field that you can throw down pretty early. In green, we have Pedro, which is a blocker that says on KO, choose one. Rest up to one of your opponent's Dawn cards, or KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 6 or less. I should have put this into the removal, the R as well, so apologies there, but this does act as a removal piece overall. This is a 4-cost, 5,000 power body, so decent stat line, and then the on KO effect is pretty powerful. In blue, we have Namule, which we talked about. Being able to cycle your hand is very nice, and it's a really cheap blocker with a 1k counter on it. In purple, we have Charlotte Brûlée, which is an on KO, add up to 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and rest it. This is a 4-cost blocker though, so this one is not nearly as good. It can bypass some of the bounce effects that we talked about, or some of the KO effects that hit 3 or less, because it is a 4. However, this is a pretty expensive blocker. You might want to be playing a vanilla in place of it, but a blocker is a blocker at the end of the day. Next up, we have Baron Tamago. This is a blocker on KO, Dawn -1. Play up to 1 Viscount Hyoko with a cost of 5 or less from your hand. I'm going to be honest, I don't think you'll ever use that effect, but this is a pretty solid stat line for a blocker, 3-cost, 4,000 power body. Then we also have Biscuit Warrior, which under the rules of this game, you may have any number of this card in your deck. It's a blocker that is a 5-cost, 5,000 power, so not the worst stat line. You can attack with it without having to invest any more Dawn. And then in black, we have Scratchman Apu, a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. Pretty solid stat line, 1k counter. It's a blocker and activate main once per turn. Give up to one of your opponent's characters -1 cost during this turn. That will likely not come into play very often. There are some unique cases where you can apply this and then maybe use a removal effect. However, the more important thing is it's a blocker. And then finally, we have Queen, which I talked about in the card advantage section. So blocker that allows you to draw 2 and then trash 1 from your hand. Included in protection are counter events. We have a 2-cost counter event in red called I'd Never Shoot You. It says up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 4,000 power during this battle. Then give up to one of your opponent's characters or leaders -1,000 power during this turn. And the trigger is up to one of your leader or character cards gains 1,000 power during this turn. So a couple of cool effects there. You're able to pump yourself up for 4,000 for the battle and then shrink a character or leader for the rest of the turn. So I think that this is a pretty strong card, especially in the common slot. You would figure this would be at least like an uncommon, because usually the common counter events are pretty bad, but this one's actually decent. Next up, we have the Earth Will Not Lose, a 1-cost event that's a counter that says if your leader has the Shandian Warrior type, up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 3,000 power during this battle. Then play up to 1 upper yard from your hand, and the trigger says draw 2 cards and trash 1 from your hand. This will be a great card if you're playing the Rainbow Luffy. I don't think this will be applied anywhere else though, so keep that in mind that you're not able to use this as a counter event if you're not playing either Calgara or the Rainbow Luffy. And then to wrap up the counter events that I think are decent is Burn Bazooka, a counter that says up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 4,000 power during this battle. Then you may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life cards to your hand. If you do, add up to 1 Shandian Warrior type card from your hand to the top of your life cards face up. I don't think you're really going to be using the second half of that effect. I'm not saying it will be impossible, but the most important thing here is that it is a 2-cost, 4,000 power counter event. And then the 2k counters in this set are few and far between, but it seems that they are heavily compiled into the black section. However, keep an eye out for any of these cards overall. These will be auto includes into your deck. So to touch on E, which includes everything else, these are probably the cards that I would include if I were you. Dalton, which is a 5-cost, 6,000 power body. On play, give up to one of your opponent's characters -1,000 power during this turn. And the Dawn ×1 activate main once per turn. You may add 1 character from the top of your life cards to your hand. This character gains rush during this turn. So being able to go on play, -1,000 power, and potentially trade into something, plus also give this character rush, just taking a life card, is pretty nice. Then we have Robson, which is a 3-cost, 4,000 power body. Dawn ×2, this character gains rush. So rush overall is a pretty strong effect in these formats because your opponent will likely not expect it to come. Carrying on with the rush agenda, we have Nekomamushi, which is an on-play. If your opponent has 7 or more rested cards, this character gains rush during this turn. I think this one's probably the best out of all of the rush cards so far because it is easier for your opponent to have 7 rested cards. That includes their Dawn as well. I'd also include S-Hawk if you can get it. It's a 4-cost 5,000 power body, Dawn ×1 if you have less life cards than your opponent. This character cannot be KO'd in battle by slash attribute cards and gains plus 2,000 power. So this will throw your opponent off a little bit. If they have a leader that has the slash attribute, then this card just sits on the field for the most part unless another character attacks into it. It also has a trigger that says you may trash 1 card from your hand. If you have 2 or less life cards, play this card. And then outside of the cards that I just mentioned, in everything else, you would want to also include vanillas. These are going to be the cards that carry you quite often in your matches. In my past couple of pre-release sets, I have not drafted any bombs, any game winners, anything like that. Nothing worth noting. However, I have been hard carried by the vanillas. So cards that basically have no effect, but have really good stat lines. These include the 3-cost 5,000 power bodies, the 4-cost 6,000 power bodies, and the 6-cost 8,000 power bodies. If you can play these on curve, you're sitting pretty well overall in the match. So yeah, I would say include these. These are auto includes as well. But outside of that, you're probably going to get to a spot where you're needing to fill up the rest of the deck. You're probably going to be sitting maybe anywhere from 30 to 35 cards. And at that point, you just kind of have to evaluate what is a good stat line that you can add into your deck that's not going to hurt you at the end of the day if you draw into it. But based off of what I've shown so far, you should try to include as many of the cards that we've come across so far into this set review. So that about does it for the OP-08 2 Legends set review for draft. Hopefully you guys can do pretty well in your limited environment. At the end of the day, what's most important is you have fun. Once again, if you find anything in this video useful or informative, please make sure to give the video a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate your support. Please let me know how you guys do in your pre-release. Would love to hear from you. And as always, see you guys in the next video.